breakthrough for scientists after they had a 20-minute conversation with a humpback whale.
Did it say I'm tired of fish? I'm tired of plankton?
I have.
So this team, including a professor from UC Davis, is hoping for more interspecies dialogue following this groundbreaking exchange with a whale named Twain.
For centuries, humans have looked into the ocean and imagined that its deepest waters might conceal forms of intelligence unlike anything we know on land. But one of the most extraordinary minds on Earth may have been swimming beneath us the entire time. Sperm whales can disappear more than 2 kilometers beneath the surface, navigating a world of absolute darkness with bursts of sound powerful enough to travel through the ocean for enormous distances. For generations, scientists could record those sounds, measure their frequency, study their rhythms, and watch the whales respond to one another. But there was always one question hanging over the recordings. Were we hearing communication, or were we simply hearing patterns that we did not yet understand? Now, researchers working with enormous collections of sperm whale recordings are using artificial intelligence to search for structure hidden inside those patterns. The goal is not simply to catalog whale sounds. It is to determine whether those sounds contain something far more sophisticated, a system of communication with rules, context, and potentially meaning. And before we dive deeper into what researchers may have discovered beneath the surface, make sure you subscribe to our channel and help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. Because what scientists are beginning to uncover about these extraordinary animals could completely change the way we understand intelligence on Earth. The question is no longer simply whether sperm whales are communicating. The question is, what have they been saying to each other all this time? To understand why that question matters, you first have to understand the animal producing the sounds. A mature male sperm whale can grow to roughly 16 to 20 meters in length and weigh many tens of tons, making it one of the largest predators ever to inhabit the oceans. Females are considerably smaller, but they occupy the center of sperm whale society. They live in closely connected family groups, often organized around older females whose accumulated experience can influence where the group travels, how it forages, and how it responds to danger. Young whales grow up surrounded by relatives, and many females remain with their family groups for decades. Males typically leave these groups when they reach adolescence and may spend much of their adult lives alone or in temporary associations before returning to warmer waters to reproduce. This creates something unusual in the animal kingdom, a society in which knowledge can potentially persist across generations. A young whale does not simply inherit genes from its mother. It grows up inside a social world, surrounded by individuals who have already learned how to survive in the environment. Then there is the brain. The sperm whale possesses the largest brain of any known animal, weighing several kilograms and substantially exceeding the mass of a human brain. Brain size alone does not prove intelligence, of course, and scientists are careful not to make that assumption. But sperm whales possess a combination of traits that makes them particularly interesting to cognitive researchers. Long lifespans, complex social relationships, sophisticated hunting behavior, prolonged parental care, and evidence of learned traditions. Their brains also contain specialized neurons known as spindle neurons, or von Economo neurons, which are found in several highly social mammals and have been associated with rapid communication and complex social processing. None of this proves that sperm whales think the way humans do. In fact, the more important possibility is almost the opposite. They may possess a form of intelligence shaped by an entirely different evolutionary history, one adapted not to forests, cities, or landscapes, but to a three-dimensional world of darkness, pressure, sound, and enormous distances. And sound is where the story becomes extraordinary. Sperm whales produce some of the most powerful biological sounds ever measured. Their famous clicks are generated through specialized structures in the head, including the spermaceti organ, and are used primarily for echolocation. A whale can send a rapid sequence of clicks into the darkness and analyze the returning echoes, effectively constructing an acoustic picture of its surroundings. This allows it to locate prey and navigate at depths where sunlight disappears completely. Some sperm whales regularly dive beyond 1,000 meters, with recorded dives reaching substantially deeper. Down there, vision becomes almost useless. Sound becomes the dominant sense. But researchers have long suspected that the clicks may do more than locate squid. Sperm whales also produce rhythmic sequences known as codas, and these vocal patterns occur during social interactions. Different groups can exhibit different vocal traditions, and whales appear to use these sounds while maintaining contact with one another. The mystery was never whether sperm whales make complex sounds. We already knew that. The mystery was whether those sounds contain a structured communication system sophisticated enough to carry information about social relationships, intentions, or context. That question helped inspire Project CETI, the Cetacean Translation Initiative. The project grew from an idea associated with marine biologist and National Geographic explorer David Gruber. Instead of searching the universe for an unknown intelligent signal, why not apply some of the same thinking to an intelligent species that already shares our planet? The analogy to SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is deliberate. SETI researchers search enormous amounts of data for patterns that could indicate an intentional signal buried inside noise. CETI applies a similar philosophy underwater. The goal is to collect enough biological and behavioral information to determine whether sperm whale vocalizations contain recurring structures and, eventually, whether those structures can be connected to specific meanings. In 2020, CETI received major funding through the TED Audacious Project, helping bring together marine biologists, linguists, computer scientists, roboticists, acoustic engineers, and machine learning specialists. It was an unusual combination because the problem itself was unusual. Understanding another species' communication is not simply a biology problem. It requires knowledge of behavior, acoustics, statistics, artificial intelligence, and linguistics at the same time. But before an AI system could search for meaning, researchers needed something even more important: context. That is where marine biologist Shane Garrow became essential. For more than 15 years, Garrow has studied sperm whales around Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean, following individual animals through years of observation. He did not treat the whales as anonymous sources of underwater sound. He learned their identities, family relationships, social histories, and behavioral patterns. He watched calves grow, followed adults across seasons, and documented interactions within the same whale families over long periods. That kind of longitudinal observation is incredibly valuable because a recording by itself tells researchers very little. If a hydrophone captures 5 clicks, scientists can measure the sound, but they may not know who produced it, who was nearby, what had happened immediately beforehand, or what happened afterward. Garrow's work helps transform those sounds into behavioral evidence. A particular sequence produced by a known female, directed toward another known female immediately after a calf has wandered away from the group, carries far more information than the same sequence recorded without context. Dominica itself makes this kind of research possible. The volcanic island rises dramatically from the Caribbean Sea, and the seafloor drops steeply not far from the coastline. Deep water therefore exists unusually close to shore, allowing sperm whales to approach the island while remaining within their preferred deep-water habitat. Researchers can follow them from boats without having to travel hundreds of kilometers offshore, creating an unusual opportunity to observe the same individuals repeatedly. Over time, this produces something that is extraordinarily rare in wildlife research: a continuously expanding social record. Scientists can connect individual whales to their relatives, track their movements, observe changes in their relationships, and associate their vocalizations with specific situations. That distinction is crucial because communication cannot be decoded from sound alone. Imagine finding a recording of two people speaking a completely unknown language. If you had no idea who they were, where they were, what they were doing, or what happened immediately afterward, translating their words would be extraordinarily difficult. But imagine observing those same speakers every day for 15 years. You know their names. You know their families. You know when they are greeting one another, arguing, searching for someone, caring for a child, or responding to danger. Suddenly, the sounds become connected to events. That is the foundation researchers need before artificial intelligence can begin searching for deeper patterns. The AI does not simply need more recordings. It needs recordings attached to reality. And that is what makes the Sperm Whale project so remarkable. Researchers are building enormous data sets in which vocalizations can be linked to individual whales, their positions, their movements, their social relationships, and the circumstances surrounding each interaction. Machine learning systems can then search through quantities of information that would be impossible for humans to examine manually. Instead of listening to thousands of recordings one by one, algorithms can compare millions of sequences, measure subtle differences in timing and rhythm, and search for combinations that repeatedly occur in specific contexts. The hope is that patterns hidden from human observers might emerge from the data. If those patterns are eventually shown to represent a genuine communication system, the implications would be profound. It would not mean that sperm whales speak English underwater, or that their communication is simply a hidden version of human language. Their world is fundamentally different from ours, and their signals evolved for a different environment and different social needs. But if their vocalizations demonstrate consistent rules for combining sounds, meaningful variation depending on context, and traditions that are learned and transmitted between generations, then scientists would have to reconsider what the word language means when applied to another species. For now, the most important discovery may not be a translated sentence. It may simply be the realization that the question is scientifically approachable. For decades, humans could hear sperm whales calling beneath the surface without knowing whether those sounds represented simple signals or something far more sophisticated. Today, researchers have the technology, the behavioral records, and the computational power to investigate the possibility in unprecedented detail. Somewhere inside billions of clicks, there may be patterns that reveal how these animals identify one another, maintain relationships, coordinate behavior, and pass information from one generation to the next. We have spent centuries listening to the ocean without understanding what was speaking back. Now, for the first time, we have begun building the tools to listen differently. Building the ear. But collecting the recordings was only the beginning. The real challenge was building something capable of listening to the whales at a scale humans had never attempted before. In the waters surrounding Dominica, researchers working with Project CETI began developing an underwater listening environment designed to capture not just isolated whale sounds, but the complete acoustic world in which those sounds occurred. Hydrophones, highly sensitive underwater microphones, were positioned across the area in carefully planned configurations. Their purpose was not simply to record a click and save it as an audio file. By comparing the arrival of the same sound at multiple sensors, researchers could estimate where it originated and begin determining which whale produced it, where that whale was located, and how it was positioned relative to the other animals nearby. Suddenly, a whale vocalization could be connected to an individual, a location, and a moment in time. That distinction changed everything. Earlier studies had produced enormous libraries of whale recordings, but a sound without context is difficult to interpret. Researchers might know what a particular click looked like on a spectrogram, but they could not always determine who produced it, who was listening, or what the animals were doing when the sound occurred. CETI's approach was designed to connect those missing pieces. The objective was to move from simply recording whale sounds to reconstructing interactions between individual whales. For a machine learning system searching for the rules behind communication, that difference is enormous. It is the difference between giving an algorithm a transcript with no explanation and giving it an entire scene complete with the speakers, their positions, their relationships, and everything happening around them. The hydrophones were only one part of the system. Researchers also use biologging technology, including suction cup tags that can temporarily attach to whales without requiring invasive procedures. These devices can record sound from close to the whale while simultaneously collecting information about depth, movement, orientation, and other aspects of the animal's behavior. Other robotic and autonomous technologies can help researchers observe whales while minimizing human interference. Together, these tools create something much more valuable than an audio archive. They create a multidimensional record of behavior. Researchers can begin asking not only, what sound did the whale produce, but what was the whale doing when it produced that sound? Who was nearby? Was another whale responding? Was the animal traveling, feeding, resting, or interacting socially? Every additional piece of information gives an eventual machine learning model another variable with which to search for patterns. And the scale of the data is the real breakthrough. Traditional field studies can spend years collecting recordings, but human researchers can only listen to a fraction of what they gather. A computational system does not have that limitation. It can compare enormous numbers of sequences, measure tiny differences in timing, and search for relationships that would be almost impossible to detect by ear. CETI has described an ambitious long-term goal of building a corpus containing billions of sperm whale vocalizations. The reason for pursuing such a massive dataset is straightforward. If meaningful communication exists inside the recordings, researchers need enough examples to distinguish genuine patterns from coincidence and background noise. The more observations available, the more precisely scientists can test whether a particular sound consistently appears in a particular social or behavioral situation. This is where artificial intelligence becomes potentially transformative. Instead of instructing a model that one particular sound must mean danger or another must mean food, researchers can allow computational systems to search for recurring relationships within the data. The objective is to minimize human assumptions at the beginning of the process. The machine can examine the timing, rhythm, frequency, repetition, and combinations of sounds, and then compare those patterns against the behavioral context recorded alongside them. In principle, if the whales are using a structured system, repeated relationships should begin to emerge. The machine does not need to understand the whale's world in the way a human does. It needs to identify patterns that remain consistent across enormous numbers of observations. What the data revealed. The first step in that analysis is to transform sound into something a machine can examine efficiently. Raw whale recordings can be converted into spectrograms, visual representations in which frequency, time, and intensity become patterns on a screen. To a human observer, a spectrogram can look like an abstract collection of lines and shapes. To a machine learning system, however, those patterns become measurable structures. Timing can be compared, frequencies can be grouped, repeated sequences can be detected. Subtle variations that might be almost impossible for a human ear to distinguish can be measured mathematically. Within the sperm whale recordings, researchers focus heavily on codas, rhythmic sequences of clicks that are especially important during social interactions. Scientists have known about codas for decades. They have documented recurring types and discovered that different sperm whale communities can possess distinctive vocal traditions. What remained much harder to determine was how flexible these sequences were and how much their interpretation depended on context. Was each coda simply a fixed signal with a fixed meaning? Or could whales modify and combine acoustic elements to produce different communicative effects? Research associated with Project CETI has provided evidence that sperm whale vocal behavior is more flexible and structured than a simple catalog of fixed calls would suggest. Studies have identified combinations of rhythm, tempo, duration, and other acoustic features that vary systematically. Some codas appear to contain additional clicks or changes in timing that distinguish one vocalization from another. These patterns have led researchers to describe sperm whale communication as having a combinatorial structure, meaning that different acoustic elements can be combined and modified rather than functioning only as isolated, unchanging signals. That discovery is important, but it requires careful interpretation. A combinatorial communication system does not automatically mean that sperm whales possess human-like language. Human language includes features such as syntax, semantics, reference, recursion, and the ability to communicate about things that are absent from the immediate environment. Scientists have not demonstrated that sperm whales possess all of these capabilities. What the research does show is something more intriguing. Their communication system contains levels of structured variation that are far more sophisticated than a simple collection of instinctive alarm calls or behavioral signals. The researchers also found evidence for something familiar to anyone who studies human cultures. Vocal traditions can differ between groups. Sperm whale communities have distinct acoustic repertoires, and individual clans can display recognizable differences in the way they produce codas. Variations in timing, rhythm, and other acoustic features can persist within social groups, suggesting that young whales learn aspects of their communication from the animals around them. In other words, the sounds are not necessarily determined entirely by genetics. Social learning appears to play an important role. That possibility changes the way we think about what is happening beneath the surface. A young sperm whale is not simply born knowing every sound it will ever produce. It grows up inside a social network, surrounded by older animals whose vocal behavior forms part of its environment. Over years of development, the young whale can learn the acoustic traditions of its community. Those traditions can then persist across generations. In that sense, the ocean may contain something resembling a culture of sound, with information transmitted socially rather than genetically. For linguists, this combination is fascinating. A communication system that contains recurring structures, context-dependent variation, socially learned traditions, and group-specific vocal patterns begins to resemble some of the properties that make human language such a powerful communication system. But resemblance is not equivalence. The scientific question is not whether whales secretly speak a human language underwater. It is whether their communication has its own internal organization that can be described using concepts normally associated with complex communication systems. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The result nobody predicted. Imagine feeding an enormous archive of whale vocalizations into an analytical system and asking it to search for structure without telling it what that structure is supposed to look like. You might expect it to find clusters of sounds associated with feeding, navigation, mating, danger, or social contact. That alone would be remarkable. After all, it would mean that a machine had identified relationships humans had struggled to recognize. But the deeper possibility is more unsettling. What if the patterns were not simply individual signals connected to individual behaviors? What if the sounds interacted with one another? What if changes in rhythm, timing, or sequence consistently altered the role of a vocalization? What if the same basic elements appeared in different combinations depending on the social situation? That would suggest that the whales were not merely producing a list of calls. They were manipulating a system. And that is the distinction that makes Project CETI so important. The most exciting research emerging from this field does not show that an AI has already translated sperm whale language into English. It has not. Scientists have not produced a verified whale dictionary, and there is currently no demonstrated system capable of holding a human conversation with a sperm whale. What researchers have discovered is more fundamental. They have begun finding evidence that sperm whale vocalizations contain structure that varies with context, structure that differs between social groups, structure that can be learned, and potentially structure that allows information to be combined in ways that humans are only beginning to understand. For decades, we looked at whale calls as sounds. Now we are beginning to look at them as a system. And once you start thinking of the ocean's clicks as a system rather than a collection of noises, a much bigger question emerges. If these animals have spent millions of years developing a sophisticated acoustic world beneath the surface, what exactly have they been telling one another? And perhaps even more importantly, how much of that conversation have we been missing simply because we never had the tools to listen? The exchange for years, the researchers had been doing something humans have always done when confronted with an unknown language. They listened, they recorded, they compared, they searched for patterns. But eventually, there comes a point when listening is no longer enough. If you believe you are beginning to understand the structure of another species' communication, the next question becomes almost unavoidable. What happens if you answer? In 2023, researchers working around Dominica decided to take that step. It was a deceptively simple experiment, but behind it was years of observation, thousands upon thousands of recordings, and an enormous amount of uncertainty. The team was not trying to teach a sperm whale a human word or train it to perform a trick. They wanted to know whether a whale would respond differently when presented with a vocal pattern that appeared to have a particular social function.